Have you ever been told you're too sensitive, too needy, too intense, just too much? I know I have, and so have many of the clients I've worked with. Growing up and even into adulthood, I absorbed those messages deeply. And as a late diagnosed neurodivergent woman, those words landed in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. I didn't just hear them as feedback about behaviour, I heard them as commentary on who I was. And maybe after hearing it enough times, you didn't just question your behaviour, you started questioning your wiring. This was my experience, and for many years I used to wonder what was wrong with me. Maybe you've walked away from conversations, replaying them in your head, wondering if your reaction was disproportionate, if you misread things, if you felt them too deeply yet again. If something in this resonates with you, stay with me, because what I'm about to share might not just validate your experience, it might completely change the way you understand yourself. As a chartered psychologist working in private practice, I spent more than a decade listening to people tell me, often with shame, that they're too much, too emotional, too reactive, too sensitive. I want to tell you something with absolute clarity. In all those years, I have never once sat across from someone whose problem actually was that they feel too much. But what I have seen again and again is people who learned very early on that their emotions were inconvenient, overwhelming, dismissed or misunderstood. People who weren't met with steadiness when they were distressed, who weren't soothed when they were scared, who weren't validated when they were hurt. And when your emotional world isn't held properly, you don't become too much. You become alone with feelings you were never taught how to carry. That's not a character flaw. That's an adaptation to an environment that couldn't fully support you. And that distinction changes everything. So if the issue isn't that you feel too much, where does this belief come from? Because it rarely begins in adulthood. It usually begins much earlier, at a time when you didn't have the language, power, or perspective to make sense of what was happening. It begins in childhood, in families and classrooms where children are often given identities long before they understand themselves. The sensitive one, the dramatic one, the clingy one, the difficult one. And here's what's important. Those labels don't just describe behaviour, they shape self-perception. A child who's repeatedly told they're overreacting doesn't think, maybe my environment feels overwhelming. They think there's something wrong with me. A child who is met with irritation instead of comfort doesn't conclude, well, the adults around me are dysregulated. They conclude, my feelings are a problem. So they adapt, they shrink, or they suppress, or they amplify even more, hoping to finally be understood. But underneath all of these strategies, there is some core belief forming quietly that my emotional experience isn't trustworthy. And when that belief takes root early enough, it can follow you into adulthood, shaping how you see yourself long before you ever question it. And when we look at both the research and what unfolds in the therapy room every day, there's a consistent picture that emerges. Most of these children did not grow up with cruel parents. They grew up with overwhelmed ones. Parents carrying their own unhealed histories, their own anxiety, their own trauma, their own emotional neglect. Parents who may have loved deeply but whose nervous systems were already stretched thin. So when a child arrived with big feelings, fear, anger, sadness, distress, those feelings didn't just land in the room. They landed in a place that didn't have the capacity to hold them. And when a parent becomes flooded, shuts down, minimises, distracts, or responds with irritation, something very subtle but powerful happens. The child doesn't think, my parent's dysregulated, or this is about their capacity. The child's brain isn't built for that level of perspective. Instead, the meaning they make is much more personal. It's, my feelings are overwhelming. My emotions are unsafe. I am too much. And because children are wired for attachment, they're wired to maintain connection at all costs. They will adjust themselves before they risk losing that proximity to their caregiver. They will downplay their distress, or they'll hypermanage their reactions, or they'll become hypervigilant to other people's emotions, all in the service of staying connected. And this is where attachment theory and emotional regulation intersect in a profound way. Because if your early attachment figures couldn't consistently co-regulate you, couldn't help you feel safe in your emotional states, you don't just struggle with feelings, you start to distrust them. And over time, that can evolve into something even more pervasive. You stop trusting yourself. So let's step into the mechanics of this, because understanding why you respond the way you do isn't just intellectually satisfying, it's therapeutic. The moment you understand the origin of a pattern, it stops feeling like proof that you're broken and it starts making sense as an adaptation. And that shift alone can be profoundly regulating and healing. So the first thing to understand is this: your nervous system learned what normal feels like from your early environment. If you grew up in a household where emotions were unpredictable, where moods shifted without warning, where affection could turn to withdrawal, or where your feelings were met with irritation, dismissal, or silence, your nervous system adapted accordingly. It became vigilant, attuned, hyper-aware of subtle emotional cues. That isn't dysfunction. That is adaptive intelligence. A child in an emotionally inconsistent environment becomes exquisitely skilled at reading tone changes, facial expressions, pauses in speech. They learn to scan for shifts even before they're consciously aware they're doing it. The difficulty is this: a nervous system calibrated for unpredictability does not automatically recalibrate when life becomes safer. You carry that sensitivity forward. You notice when someone's energy slightly changes. You feel distance before it's been named. You sense tension in the room within seconds. And because your history taught your body that emotional shifts signal danger, your internal alarm system activates quickly. And this is why being too sensitive in relationships is rarely about the volume of feeling. It's about resonance. So when your partner seems distracted, the hurt is real, but it may also be touching every earlier moment when you reached for connection and didn't find it. The present moment doesn't just register as present, it echoes. You're not only reacting to today, you're reacting to the accumulation of every similar moment that came before. Now, the second crucial piece is emotional regulation. Children don't learn to regulate themselves in isolation. They learn through co-regulation, through their caregivers. A distressed child who is soothed by a calm, steady caregiver gradually internalizes that steadiness. Over time, that external regulation becomes an internal capacity. It's like building emotional scaffolding. If your distress was consistently met with distraction, frustration, absence, shutdown, that scaffolding doesn't fully develop. Not because you're flawed, but because the building materials weren't reliably available. So your emotions can feel enormous, overwhelming. They arrive without warning and have no off switch. That's not pathology, it's a developmental gap. And developmental gaps can be repaired. So what do you actually do with this? First, shift from self-criticism to curiosity. When a reaction feels intense, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" try asking, "What does this remind me of?" Not to dismiss the present, but to understand the full emotional load that you're carrying. Second, begin separating the present from the past. When a strong emotion rises, name it precisely. Not, "I feel awful," but "I feel a surge of anxiety that I'm about to be abandoned." Specificity creates space, and space creates choice. Third, lean into safe co-regulation. Healing often happens in relationship because the wound formed there in relationship. Now that might mean therapy. It might mean intentionally choosing relationships where your emotions are met with steadiness rather than irritation. It might mean learning how to communicate your emotional needs without apology. And I want to say something important about suppression. Many people who were told they were too much become experts at being less. They minimize their needs, they apologize for their feelings, present a calm exterior while internally they're flooded. It's an intelligent survival strategy. But suppression doesn't erase emotion. Neuroscience is very clear on this. Suppressed emotion still activates in the body in the same way. It still influences your behaviour in relationships, but it does it from underground. That numbness some people describe, that sense of disconnection, often it isn't about absence of feeling. It's feelings that had nowhere safe to go. So if this is resonating, hear this. The goal isn't to feel less. The goal is to feel safely, to build an internal environment where emotions can move through you without overwhelming you, to build external relationships where your emotional life is received with steadiness. You were not born broken. You were born capable of feeling deeply, and that depth met an environment that couldn't consistently hold it. The conclusion that you are too much made sense in that context, but it isn't a permanent truth. And working with a qualified therapist, especially one trained in attachment-based or psychodynamic approaches, can be transformative in reshaping this pattern. You deserve spaces where your emotional world is handled with care and competence. And if someone came to mind while you were listening to this, someone who has spent years believing their emotions are the problem, share this with them, because sometimes the most healing thing we can offer another person is language that finally makes their experience make sense.